Hey guys, welcome to this edition of the Cover One Buffalo podcast. I am your host tonight, along with my co-host, Greg Thompson. What's going on, my man?
Hey, what's happening, man? A lot of fun things keep happening. I keep assuming the Bills are done and they keep doing more stuff. So that's kind of fun.
They are not done. Yeah, no, and they were asked about it this week in Bean's press conference in the owner meeting. He kind of was like, well, I am done, but I'm never done. Which I was like, oh, thanks a lot, Brandon Bean, keeping me up at night, scrolling on every rumor on the Twitter machine. So, yeah, no, not anything totally crazy, but obviously some rumors flowing around, and we had the Chris Ivory cut that we'll talk about, but nothing too crazy happening here this past week that we didn't talk about last show, right?
Welcoming back EJ Gaines. That happened technically. So just every time I think they're done somewhere, they just keep unearthing more pieces. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, and it's nice because nothing totally crazy. It's just nice, perfect little fits all over the place. So
yeah, I thought I was crazy when I was telling people in the Slack channel that I think we might sign maybe as many as 10 free agents there. Oh, that's crazy. If we get 4 or 5, it'd be great. And I'm like, no, I think we might get 10 or even 12, but that'll be, some last minute one-off veteran minimum guys. And I think we're at like 16 now, if you count Duke Williams. So it's just bonkers. It's just crazy that we've added that many NFL caliber guys.
Absolutely. And so before we get into it too much here, I do want to welcome everybody. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We are part of the Cover One team over at cover1.net. If you haven't heard of cover1.net, head over there and get involved. We have tons of scouting reports coming out daily. You really can't get enough of the content that these guys are putting in the work with Ross Allen, Jordan Reed, Christian. These guys are just grinding to get all these scouting reports out there for the people. And Eric is working on some really cool stuff with Bills archetypes, meaning players that fit the mold of what the Bills have done in the past and how they're drafting, and giving that to giving that to the fans to show guys that maybe we should be looking at. Eric's done a really good job of pinpointing players in the past. So cover1.net is where it's at. And right now our premium membership is only $10, and that is for the entire year. That's going to cover you for the whole season, get you involved. We got a ton of premium content that's going to be coming out, especially here in the off season as we get ready through the summer. We got all kinds of stuff that we drop for you guys. So the $10 deal you can't beat. So head over to cover1.net and join that premium membership. Greg, what's your favorite part of the premium membership, and why would you encourage people to join?
Obviously, I love the app. I love having access to the scouting breakdowns, the videos whenever I have spare time. But I really love the chat. The premium channel, Slack channel is just awesome. Being able to talk with educated people that understand what the Bills are doing, see the long term, are able to have healthy debate. We debate and argue all the time, but people are reasonable and respectful, and don't go down the crazy rabbit holes that you find on Twitter and Reddit and all the other social media avenues. So I really love it. It's a great community, very welcoming, and have really grown to be friends with many of the people in there.
Yeah, it's a great community, and definitely one of the reasons that I think everybody should get involved in the premium membership. But outside of that, just the premium content itself, the $10, you really can't beat it. You can't buy draft guides and get a year-long membership like that. So it's a great value. And like Greg said, that we do have the app. So on your iOS, Android device, head over there. While you're here on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe, and hit the little notifications bell. That'll let you know every time we go live. Like I just went live, and I don't know if you heard the ding in the background, but that was my phone telling me that we went live. So it's nice that way. So let's get right into it tonight, though, because we got a lot to cover. We are going to talk about the owners' meetings, the press conferences Brandon Bean and Sean McDermott had. Obviously, there's rules changes that come up at all the owners' meetings, so we'll go over those a little bit, and then we're going to run through. We did it last episode, and it was a hit, and so now we're back on YouTube, and we got back in our normal chat here, and we're going to do another mock draft simulation with you guys. So interested to see your guys' chats coming up while we do this mock draft simulation here to end this episode. So Greg, owners meetings come up this week. It's a fun time for the league. Everybody's together in the same place. Brandon Bean and Sean McDermott both spoke. Kind of just the same thing that we've come to expect from them in their speeches and in their press conferences. Anything that stood out to you about either one of those?
No, I mean, Brandon Bean is always on kind of the other end of the spectrum, a little more forward forthright than many GMs. I think he's always very careful. He doesn't give up anything that is of a competitive disadvantage, but he is pretty open and shares like, yeah, we kind of feel like we made some good moves there. We understood what we were doing here. I don't think he shared anything crazy that was out there, but talked about being open to additional acquisitions, and obviously is, because we just signed more people. So continually keeping his eyes out there. Sean McDermott is at the other end of the spectrum. That man can talk for extended periods of time without actually saying anything. And I still like the things he says. So he's just never going to give anything away. He's always going to keep everything close to the vest, never going to commit to anything. Everything is an open competition. Everyone has an opportunity. He's happy about everything that everyone is doing. He's not going to give you anything that he thinks could be the slightest bit of information you could use. So that's what we got again. Both of them spoke positively about Buffalo again. I actually thought that Kim Pagula came off pretty well in her press conference. I think that she's really kind of coming into her role there, the getting more serious about the stadium. She's on 4 different committees within the NFL with some pretty significant gravitas. So, certainly coming into her own and her role there. And I think Terry's comfortable with that. I think that he prefers letting her be out in the forefront of more of those things because that's what she's more comfortable with.
Yeah, Terry just wants to sit in the background and crunch numbers and data. Yeah. He's talked about it before. He wants to, even with the prospects and stuff, he just wants to get involved in the analytics and let Kim handle all that stuff. So that's a nice fit. As far as Brandon Beane, one thing I thought was interesting, because I don't think he lies. I've actually just gone back and watched all of his press conferences last year when we were taking a quarterback and people were trying to say, oh, he's misleading and his press conferences. I was like, I don't think so. I think he's telling the truth, but in a way that doesn't tip his hand, but he's not coming out and lying to the media about what his plans are. And one thing that stood out to me when he was talking about values and their draft board and talking about where guys are, how they hadn't touched the draft board since the combine, and then they got to go back through. And he talked about specifically running backs. And he said, oh, if you have a running back in the 4th round that you're looking at, and you want to go back and watch and say you have 3 of them. And he kind of just used a running back in the 4th round as an example. And that stood out to me. I was like, I don't know that this is something that if you go look at his board, I bet that there's some running backs in the 4th round. And that is the first thing that popped to his head. And he's not worried about talking about it. And I don't know that he's lying or trying to mislead to say we're looking at running backs in the 4th round. I don't even know that he thought of it. But that is one thing that actually stood out to me because it makes sense. It's something we've talked about a lot with Chris Ivory getting cut. I think that even makes more sense. Yeah. Did you catch on that, or do you think I'm just got my conspiracy theory hat on? Or
I'm always ready to put on my tinfoil hat. But I actually caught another thing in that same phrasing. He also made comments about when you're looking at the depth of a certain position and that you may be able to wait a little bit longer because you don't need to take a guy in the 1st or 2nd round. And it kind of freaked me out because he talked about it with the defensive line depth.
Yeah.
And I don't, there's no reason to take that as a reason, we're out on Ed Oliver and Montez Sweat. But like you said, it's interesting that he phrased it that way and said, I think it's 100% why we haven't seen a signing on the defensive line so far, because there's so much depth. He knows no matter what, we're walking away with the defensive tackle and defensive end. And even if it's a 3rd and a 5th rounder, we still feel pretty decent about it because of the depth here. But he was phrasing that when he was talking about that you do take it into account. And he talked about something that I maybe don't articulate all that well sometimes. I believe strongly in that you make tiers in your draft board and that the position premium comes into play in that, and that you don't outright rank a lesser offensive tackle ahead of a better inside linebacker, but that if they're close at all, the grade might be higher because that's a better position. And he pretty clearly said that you take those things into account, whether it's need, whether it's position premium, when you're making your draft board. Those are factors. Now, you're not putting a lesser cornerback ahead of a better, I'll use say inside linebacker again, or guard, a more, replaceable position. But if they're close, you're going to rank that guy ahead because of the position premium or because of the need. And it's your tiebreaker when you're setting those tiers. So just some interesting things to take away. Not anything, again, he's not giving away any competitive advantage, but I thought that was interesting. You picked up on the piece there about the running back in the mid round, because I certainly think we're going to see it. And I am guessing we're going to pick one of those here in just a little bit.
Yeah, and I felt like it just validated our thoughts on it, because it's something that we talked about, and I do think that's the sweet spot, in that fourth or later area. So for him to say that, just maybe it's not true, and maybe he's just blowing smoke to the media, but it at least validated my own thoughts for now, and I love getting my own thoughts.
I tell myself I'm right all the time. It feels good.
Yeah, no, my wife's not telling me, so somebody's got to do it.
Oddly, no one else is telling me.
No, and I that is an interesting point you bring up about boards and stuff, because I do want to bring on Dan Hatman of the Scouting Academy. I think he's going to come on to the show here soon. And I was talking to him offline a little bit about boards. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in the ranking of, we see them on different websites of big boards and things like that. And it's 1 through 10 and it's a number, and a guy, if you're at pick 8 and a guy is the 7th guy on your board, you take that guy, and it is not binary, or it's not slotted in that way. There really is, it's like a living, breathing board, and there could be a number of guys in that range. It's more ranges and tiers than it is slotted positions. So I think a lot of times people get caught up in that when we're talking about boards and values, and say, well, if Ed Oliver is your 7th best guy and you're picking, you got to take him because it's best player available, and they've said best player available the whole time. There's still some need and fit that allow for that range to kind of be in flux.
Yeah, I've heard a couple different people describe theirs differently, and I would say we would probably be surprised how much variance there is in the NFL how they build their boards and how they do their tiers. Some of I think the general idea that I've heard is a lot of them do upper first, middle first, lower first, upper second, lower second, third, fourth, fifth, beyond. Yeah. And it's, so at the top, you might have 3 different tiers just within the first round. And some years you might have 8 guys in the upper first, and some years you might have 2. And some years you might have 15 first rounders total, and some years you might have 27. And that just how it works. So let's say it goes to our pick and we have 4 upper tier first round picks. If one of the 4 of them are there, it's a slam dunk. You run up to the podium and turn in your card and you're good. Let's assume those 4 are gone. The second tier in the first round, they have 7 guys there. The first 4 are gone. 3 more of those guys are gone, and then 2 later round guys, later tier guys we didn't like, and there's 2 or 3 left. They then are going to weigh that of, hey, these are all guys we think are worth this pick. What makes the most sense? Where do we have a strong differential? Is one guy way towards the top? And then they're going to take those other things into account, like position premium, like team need, because they're equal and in that tier, and then they'll make their judgment call based on what they have there. And I think what they disclosed on how they did free agency, they built the same thing with tiers. He talked about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and within each tier they had red mark target guys. I would guess that's pretty similar as well. Sure. That, hey, I'm going to use this as an example, and I don't mean it this way, but I'm going to use Ed Oliver because he's a common Bills tie-in. He's a guy that I could see in theory that they grade as, hey, he's an upper tier guy, but he's not a target because we don't like the interviews that we got, or we think the Major Applewhite thing was real. I don't think that, and I don't think you do either. But just as an example, that could be where, hey, he's in that tier, but we actually have take that back. We have Juwan Taylor as a red star target. But we don't. We have Montez Sweat graded as an upper tier guy, but we don't have him as a target because of the heart condition. So those can be some of the things that come into play where, hey, he grades this well, but if we get into a tiebreaker scenario, we're going Juwan Taylor because he was graded that well.
Checked all the boxes.
And checked all the boxes.
Yeah, right.
So I think it's that kind of thing when they set it up.
Yeah, and so I think best player available is not what always is thought. I think it's a range, and they got – McDermott talked about it quite a bit in his press conference of not only do guys have to be a fit, but they got to check all the boxes. And that's what they felt that they got in free agency. And we can kind of segue that into the talking a little bit about bringing back EJ Gaines,
Sure.
because this was a guy that they said, this was a perfect fit in free agency because they know he checks all the boxes. He fits the culture. He fits the scheme. They know what they're getting with him, so that this was an easy one for them. They've kept in touch with him this whole time with his agent. So that was easy because of the culture fit. And he said, that was a big deal for them in getting players to Buffalo. And so this one was particularly easy. I was really excited to see EJ Gaines, and this one surprised me a little bit because Kevin Johnson coming in added that competition. I'm not really sold on Kevin Johnson as a player. I think it's nice to see that competition. But for right now, I think EJ Gaines is quarterback 2, and that the competition is up to Levi Wallace to prove otherwise.
I would agree. And I think that, in fairness, he was given the same contract area as John Feliciano and Spencer Long. He was in that same range where I consider that to be, hey, we think you can be a starter. And in fairness to them, I bet this is the conversation that they had with John Feliciano. Hey, we're going to pay you as though you're a capable starter. And if you earn that, that's great. If you're just a valuable backup, we're still paying you like that. And I hope that brings you in to be a good contributing, good locker room guy. And that's basically how they are now, that, hey, it's one thing. I think that a lot of guys have pride and want to start because they believe in themselves. But a lot of it ties into, hey, I'm not getting my reps and I'm not going to get my next check. I'm not going to get my next contract. Whereas when you're already paying them, I think there's a little bit more buy-in to say, hey, we want you to play, but if you rotate in, we're still paying you the same amount of money. You're not losing out here. So I think that it is slotted pretty well. That I agree, EJ Gaines, the first mini camp walkthrough, he's probably cornerback 2. I think that Levi Wallace is right there, and I think that Kevin Johnson is a nice low risk, high upside play, that if he's healthy and his athleticism and explosion comes through, that's great. And if it doesn't, he's our cornerback 5 anyways. So no big deal. I think, what do you think about the fact that we have 5 NFL caliber cornerbacks on the roster right now?
Well, I'm not sold on Kevin Johnson being NFL caliber, yes, right. He can play cornerback.
Potential and upside.
Potentially, sure. Yeah, no, I think it's great because one of my biggest concerns that I felt wasn't getting talked about enough heading into the offseason was the lack of depth outside of Trey White, because I like what Levi Wallace was able to do. I was a big fan of his and him getting more playing time at the end of the year. But my concern was, all right, this guy still was an undrafted guy. I don't know that what he showed is who he is, and that he can sustain that success in the NFL for a full extra season once guys have tape on him, know his tendencies. Receivers are going to look back at his tape now. They didn't have tape on this guy, and they're going to be able to see he clearly made mistakes on tape. You're going to see it, and they're going to be able to pick on him a little bit differently in his second year. So I didn't feel confident going into the season with those two locked down. I feel a lot more confident heading into minicamp, assuming they don't draft any cornerbacks anywhere early anyway to compete. I feel super confident with EJ Gaines, Levi Wallace, and Kevin Johnson, and then a healthy Taron Johnson coming back in that slot role. So I really enjoy that they've addressed that for me, because I don't know if they're going to carry all these guys, but I feel a lot more confident. One point I brought up with the EJ Gaines signing, I like it more this time around, is that Levi Wallace is here. I think he's perfect in that 4th cornerback spot. And we don't need to rely on EJ Gaines to play 16 games, in my opinion, because we know Levi Wallace can come in and at least play. There's not a huge drop off in that role. So I feel like the pressure isn't as much on EJ Gaines to play 16 games, because I don't know that he can.
Yeah. Well,
and that's okay.
I think that, darn it, I can't remember who said it. But there was a really good tweet out there to say that, hey, any team going into the season with Levi Wallace, Kevin Johnson, or EJ Gaines, depending on them to be your cornerback 2, is a mistake. But a team going into the season with Levi Wallace, EJ Gaines, and Kevin Johnson to be your cornerback 2, cornerback 4, and cornerback 5 is great, because it's very reasonable that you're going to get 16 games out of the 3 of them, right, and that the best man is going to, thrive and be in there. I'm going to nerd out for a second, so you can take a quick nap. When we go into looking at my favorite website, which is SpotTrack, looking at some of the contracts here, it is interesting what you brought up there. that there's a big difference in some of the signings that we gave out. John Feliciano is making a $3.4 million cap hit. It's $3.9 million to cut him. John Feliciano is a roster lock for this year. Andre Roberts, we're paying him $2.6 million. It's a $3 million dead cap hit to cut him. Andre Roberts is a roster lock. However, Kevin Johnson is a $2.7 million cap hit. He's only $400,000 to dead cap to cut him. Russell Bodine, 2.8 is only $500,000. Vlad Dukas is the easiest. It's only $83,000 out of his $2 million. Frank Gore is the same. Leadrian Waddle is the same. Your Raphael Bushes, Julian Stanfords, people like that are the same, where some of those guys that I think have a pretty good chance to make the roster are not absolute locks, and we are probably going to have more than one surprise as the season comes to play, and as we finish training camp. I think it's very likely and very possible that we could end up with a few of those surprise cuts that are there because we added so much depth that someone's not going to make it.
Yeah, no, I think Kevin Johnson right now is on the outside looking in. He's really going to have to impress throughout mini camps and training camp to keep his job on this roster, unless Levi takes a huge step backwards and they try to do something with him. I don't think they will. I think he's really, the signing of EJ Gaines says to him, like, hey man, we're not sure who you are. Your contract is clearly easily to move on from. You really got to ball out. And that's a good position for the Bills to be in, because this is where they were not a year ago, right? They were just basically begging bottom roster guys around the league to stay on this team and stay healthy so that they could field a team. I know it sounds bad, but with the salary cap position that they were in, that's where they were. Now they can afford to say, hey, we're going to take a waiver on this guy who is a low risk guy. We'll pay him a little bit to come in. If it doesn't work out, we'll cut ties with you. We don't have any dead cap really, so no loss for us. It's a win-win for the Bills. It's a great position to be in.
Yeah, and I think one, Chip had asked a question in the chat. I do glaze over sometimes some of the things I'm used to in the spot track. When I say dead cap, the reason that some of those 1-year contract guys that means they gave them a small signing bonus to sign, and the rest of it isn't paid to them unless they make the 53-man roster. So, to get somebody to come on board like a Frank Gore, like a Kevin Johnson, Leadrian Waddle, who had alternatives elsewhere, you had to give them some money. So it looks like their main path was $400,000 to $500,000 to sign, and then if you make the roster, we'll pay you the $2 million or so that you'll be guaranteed the rest of the season. So that's where that comes in. And the one cut that you did bring up that I was maybe a little surprised with was Chris Ivory, and I had been lobbying that, hey, it's not as obvious as some of you guys think because injuries happen. We do have an older backfield. There was no cap benefit to cutting him today versus cutting him August 31st. So I actually expected guys like Bodine and Vlad Dukas and Chris Ivory to stick on the roster into camp. The only thing I can think of is that either they took it upon themselves or Ivory saw the writing on the wall and went to them and said, hey, I realize I'm not part of your guys' plans. Just out of respect, can you give me the chance to get cut now to catch on with someone else? Because I still want to play, and I realize it's not going to be here in Buffalo. And that from a employee relations and locker room and player relations standpoint, they thought that was the right thing to do. So there wasn't any real benefit to cutting him today versus the day before the 53-man cut down. We still got the same $2.165 million in cap savings. So I think that's there. I know Sal Mayorana had a nice tweet about that. If we were going into the season with Gore, Ivory, and Shady, that was crazy. But now that it's been formalized that we cut Ivory, I think it makes the Frank Gore signing look even better, because we now basically got Frank Gore and $170,000 for free in order to make that trade between the two.
Yeah, I thought Ivory was just a dead man walking the second Gore walked in the building. And like you said, that was a matter of when. I didn't mind if he was there all summer to compete. I get that happening. Mike, a little bit of get that tinfoil hat back on. When I saw it happening, that was at the same time this Ogba, or however you say his name, rumor was
Emmanuel
coming up. Emmanuel Ogba. Not a fan. Personally, and that's something we could talk about if we want, that rumor that was flying around. I don't love his game. I watched a few games, don't love it. But I started thinking in my own little head that maybe we could get Duke Johnson and that they were just clearing some space there. It's not going to happen. It's a conspiracy theory, but I just want Duke Johnson. So I was just trying to force it in my head because it's a fit, man. I'd like it. If they're talking to Cleveland, you might as well see what it takes.
See what else you can get. Hey, Cleveland's trade happy, so I'm certainly good to go with that. My stance on paying running backs. I don't want any more running backs who aren't on rookie contracts, but I do
unless their name's Duke Johnson.
I do like Duke Johnson. He may be the lone exception. Emmanuel Ogbah, for anybody who hasn't looked, he's a depth rotational defensive end. Honestly, really similar to Shaq Lawson.
He looks exactly like Shaq Lawson.
Well, and he was also a first round pick who is kind of underperformed a bit. Is still in his rookie deal. So if we traded for him, I think we take on like $1.8 million in salary, and that's it. Much. It's nothing to take him on. So if it was a minimal thing, which now, in the back seven on defense, Cleveland really struggles. So it's not crazy in a player for player trade that maybe Julian Stanford, maybe Raphael Bush, maybe Kevin Johnson, one of those kind of level players, like, hey, we're going to cut this guy, you're going to cut that guy. Why don't we just swap and we keep him on the nice contracts? Maybe that's speculation.
Sure.
I don't understand why Cleveland would want to get rid of a cheap rotational defensive end. I want 8 defensive ends that can play, 8 defensive linemen they can play all the time. So I don't get why he's on the block, but if they're going to get rid of him for cheap, I'm ready to take him.
Yeah, no, I saw a lot of people on Twitter like really want him. I think some of it is the offseason and the shiny new toy idea. But when I watched, so I hadn't seen much of him. I went back and fired up Game Pass and watched 3 of his games that morning because I have no life. And it just honestly, it reminded me of watching Shaq Lawson. Just has no pass rush strategy or moves or anything like that. And I'm not even going to knock Shaq Lawson all that much because I thought he had a decent season for us and impressed me in some instances. But I don't know that we need another Shaq Lawson. So I don't know if I love the idea of that move. I'd much rather the Ziggy Ansah thing pan out or some of the other rumors that are out there, or go with a Sweat, at 9, something like that. So,
yeah, I'm right in line right now with the idea that, I don't know that I want to sign anyone before the draft. I'd like to have some things lined up in case. And then if we don't hit on one early and we end up with a later round developmental guy, then sign someone and figure it out from there and go with that. But I'd prefer to give us that luxury, unless, Bean is always going to be a value shopper. If he comes across a number he can't turn down on Ziggy Ansah with the right terms, or, with a Timmy Jernigan, or with even a Ndamukong Suh, if he gets a number that he likes, he's going to bring in talent. And every time we think he's done, he goes out and signs Maurice Alexander, or he goes out and signs Jake Fisher, or he goes out and gets EJ Gaines. So
yeah.
I don't ever think he's turning off that mode.
No, and he shouldn't. And he even said that with bringing in Gaines. And somebody asked about Levi Wallace and what does that mean to him? He said, well, there's nothing's going to be handed. He played fine, but nothing's handed to anybody on this roster, with the exception of Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds. There, a few guys have a clear path to their job, but I think that that's totally fine. Let's keep this going here because the owners' meetings also brought about some rules changes that I think we maybe should just touch on.
Sure.
Obviously, we saw the voting to keep the 2008 kickoff rules changes. Everybody's used to that now. We had a whole season, or the 2018 rule changes. Their stats showed a decrease in concussions because of the rule change. So I expected that rule to stay. They want to eliminate concussions. Yeah, that worked exactly as intended for the league and the rules committee. So no surprise there. Blindside block rules changes. Not a shock that this rule got changed. I don't know that I love it though, man.
There's some risk to it, and I know everybody in Bills Mafia remembers this, the Henry Anderson hit on Stephen Hauschka, and that's the kind of play they're trying to legislate out of there. But Kelvin Benjamin lighting up a Patriot. There's some good highlights you're showing here that it's a tough judgment call. So I think the wording that they have is if you are facing back to your own goal line and going backwards just like these highlights here. I think it's showing where, if you do that, it'll be called a illegal blindside hit. The original rule was only if it was to the head and forearm area. I think now there's any forcible contact. I think there's a great opportunity to clean that up a little bit. And I've always been a big fan and advocate of the fact that players can wall guys off and not light them up. Like, you can get in that position and set a pick and wall them off and not have to light them up and still accomplish the exact same thing. And that's the technique I think we're going to see a lot more.
No, I think we will. I think how I was taught football was one thing, to keep your head on a swivel, that not to be looking at any particular, you want to keep your head on the swivel. So the guys that you just see hyper focused looking at one way and aren't looking around is a little crazy to me, especially since they've been playing forever. But the other thing is, if you have a chance to light a guy up, you go and do it. And obviously at the pro level, these are people's careers, their livelihood. There is this sort of a unspoken respect that you don't try to take a guy out, right? But it is still football. It's a violent game. You do want to set tone. I just think that even with the way the game is trending to try to become a safer game, I think there's still coaches out there. Obviously, Greg Williams is still out, and he's a coach. There's coaches like him that are out there that are saying, hey, if you have a chance to knock somebody out, light them up, you do it because it sets the tone of the game. So I think that there's still probably a good amount of players in the league that are old school guys that didn't like the helmet rule last year that are not going to like this rule. There's a changing of, we're right in the middle of a big change in football between the guys that were coached by old school guys that were brought up the old school way versus people that are coming up in a more healthy, brain friendly football. And I think it's going to be some interesting times in how these rules are enforced.
Yeah. And I know a couple guys in the chat, Creasby in here is asking about some of the other rule changes that are coming up here. So what are your thoughts on now introducing pass interference as a reviewable play? And it sounds like it's reviewable through the entire game. In the final 2 minutes, it can automatically be brought up by the review booth, but any other time during the game, both a called pass interference that you don't think was, and a play where there was no pass interference called, but you think there should have been, the coach can throw the challenge flag. What are your thoughts on what kind of Pandora's box that might open?
I like the direction that this is trending in. I think that it's going to take years of work to get pass interference correct. And I don't know that it'll ever be perfect, but it's the rule that I like the least in football. It is totally one-sided to the offense in the way it's called, in the way it's penalized. Obviously, we're not changing the spot foul penalty, which I would like that to be the next piece of this, is to get rid of the spot foul, because I've seen too many times you shouldn't be able to have a 60-yard penalty.
Yeah, Joe Flacco's made a career out of it.
Honestly, no, and Tom Brady's done a ton at the end of a half or game, and they get the ball at the 1 because contact was initiated. And offense all the time. You said Randy Moss made a career out of pass interference that never got called. And if it goes against him, it's getting called every time. So the league has trended towards the offense on that side of the ball. It's always a huge play. It's more of a passing game than ever. So I think that this is really nice to see, empowering coaches and the teams to make sure that they're getting this correct, or when it isn't called at all, to make sure that it is getting at least another look. I think there's going to be a lot of problems with it. I think it's going to get called super heavy in the preseason. Twitter's going to freak out. Everyone's going to start hating this rule. They'll dial it back throughout the season. But I think I like the way that this is trending.
Yeah, and I'll use the example. I know Sal Capaccio had a great tweet about it, hoping this doesn't turn into the, hey, what is a catch? And now that's the new phrasing of, oh, what is pass interference? And I'm going to use the catch rule as the example that, you want to know what? We had a year or two there where it was really ugly and it was kind of painful, and then it got better, and then it got better. And this past year, I thought it was pretty good. And I thought they kind of finally got it figured out. And maybe I hope they learn from that. It doesn't take quite so many, lessons learned and painful bumps and bruises. But it's going to be pretty close to that, hey, we're going to kind of figure it out. And the biggest thing I know you and I talked about, prepping for the show, you simply can't have that play that happened to the Saints. Right or wrong, I get that there were other opportunities and one play doesn't decide a game. that play cost them a trip to the Super Bowl, and that you cannot have that. You can't have that kind of negative attention where it was simply avoidable. That if we had a rule, any logical person would have looked at that and said, yes, that was obviously pass interference. That should have been flagged. First down, they keep the ball, take 3 knees, game over. So it's just one of those things where I just don't think that it's quite as big a deal as some people have made it out to be. And I agree with you. It's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and somebody here, Cresby said, and I've heard this quite a bit, that it slows the game down. And I don't know that that's true. You still have the same amount of challenges, right? It didn't change. So it's just adding another play type to challenge. So I don't know that we're going to see it slow the game down. I think that's something we'll have to see play out.
There weren't additional challenges added in. So right. I mean, the coaches still only have the same amount of challenges. So it's just something they can challenge instead, not in addition to.
Yes. And so obviously you still have in the final 2 minutes, there's more available play types that can become challenged in that final minute. But here's the thing is, I would have rather, like this, let's take the Saints game because obviously that spurred this conversation. I would have rather had that game go 3 minutes longer and get that call right.
Yes.
It's really not that long of a period of time that it takes to challenge these. I think they are getting better at the amount of time it takes to do a challenge. I think that the camera technology that they're using is getting better. I think those are things that we're going to continue to see get used more often. And let's be honest, if we're worried about the time of the game with the NFL, TV timeouts take a whole lot more time than any challenges take or anything like that. So the NFL's not worried about the pace of the game.
I never understand that because the amount of my time in my life that I spend watching football versus the amount of time in my life I spend not watching football, I'm fine with football taking longer. That's fine with me.
Yeah, and honestly, I just rather they get it right. It's such a big part of the game now with the passing game, and the defense is so limited in what they can do. From when we grew up watching Rod Woodson just assault wide receivers the whole way down the field. Yeah,
Steve Atwater just destroying people.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore. So they're so limited. It is a nice check in trending towards saying, hey, we want to get this right. And I don't know that this is going to be it that gets it right, but I think that this is going to trend that way. And that makes me happy that the league saw a problem, said, hey, we need to address this. It might not be the right fit, but there is no other way to test these things. Obviously, we talked about before the show started, we have the AAF, and that is the closest we've ever had in recent memory to an area where rules can get tested. But the NFL doesn't really have a place to test things unless we pass a rule and it goes through the process, like the 2018 kickoff rules.
Yeah, and that was
sits for a year.
Agreed to for only 1 year and then needed reapproval. I thought that was a smart step.
And that's how you have to test it in live action. And I think that they care about the game enough to not destroy the game with this rule, but they want to be better. And I'm all for that.
Yeah. A couple other quick items before we go on to the mock draft. They did expand the ejection rules a little bit, that now a flagrant play within the play, like a hit to a head or neck, a player can be ejected. So that's a step further that direction.
Goes along with the blind spot rule.
Yeah.
Not a little bit.
Not the college targeting rule completely, but closer to that, where it's an option. I actually found an interesting one that not a lot of people talked about was, when you see those weird penalties where there's an unsportsmanlike conduct after a score and they end up just tacking it onto the kickoff, and it's weird because they just kick off from the 20 or from the 50, depending on who was penalized. Now you're going to have the option to actually enforce that on the extra point or the 2-point conversion. So in a tight game, late in the game, if there's a dumb penalty, you now could make someone take a 2-point conversion from the 17-yard line, or force someone to kick an extra point that's actually a 48-yard kick. So I don't know that the circumstance is going to happen all that often, but just something to add into the strategy of the game. I think that's a little interesting. And then one thing that always confused people, that it was dumb that there was only 2 or 3 tiebreakers in the NFL draft order, and that guys would have teams would have a coin flip. It's dumb that we have a coin flip. So now they've made it so that the exact same 6 tiebreaker rules that apply for whether you get into the playoffs or not are what's going to be used in reverse order of the draft order, which I think was a long time coming.
I was hoping for an arm wrestling competition, just because I think Sean McDermott would
with
win.
McDermott, we got a good shot.
That's what I'm saying. It would give us a nice competitive advantage. And the coin flip thing was so stupid to me that
how
we're
in
still
the world? Yeah, a multi-billion-dollar organization with a coin flip.
Coin flipping over picks. Unbelievable. So yeah, that's great that they fixed that. As far as the one you brought up in the strategy, I think that's actually a sneaky great rule change, because
I like it.
This goes back to kind of just my argument about culture. It does matter the things you do on the field. And so if you're doing something stupid at the end of a scoring play because you're frustrated, now that has the ability to affect your team. So hopefully it'll remove that dumb extra stuff at the end of scoring plays that we've seen for years where it's just a stupid flag. Hopefully they don't go overboard with calling touchy stuff at the end of plays, because you get frustrated when somebody scores on you, but anything that's kind of over the line, hopefully they'll call it and it will have a real impact now.
Yeah, now there's actually a strategic impact. So I like the idea that it's built in. Anytime you add in strategy where someone can make a smart decision, I think it makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. Let's get into the fun.
Yeah, Aaron, so we'll flip it around this time. I'll play more of host. You can be Brandon Bean in the GM. Last time we did go the path of an offensive tackle early, so let's keep that in mind and maybe try a different avenue, and I will play the role I will play the role of Sean McDermott and lobbying you on what I think you should take, but you get to make the ultimate decision. For anyone who hasn't had a chance yet, you'll see me switching over on screen share now, that I am going to go to fanspeak.com, which both Aaron and I are big fans of. And I'm one of their premium users. They actually have a full GM mode that you can go in and sign contracts. We're going to do their draft model called On the Clock here. So I'm picking the Bills. We're going to go in. We are going to do all 7 rounds because we care about your wants and needs and want to satisfy you. We are moving in. Aaron, what are your thoughts on the draft board here? We did CBS last time, so I want to use a very commonly known one, but maybe something a little bit different. What would you think if we went with Bleacher Report Matt Miller this time?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Matt Miller, he's a guy that I have grown to respect what he does. I used to not love him. I
don't agree with plenty that he says, but I respect him.
Yeah, dude, it's hard. I think it's easy to give a lot of these guys grief, but just covering one team for the draft is hard. I couldn't imagine doing all the teams.
Yeah. So again, just in fairness, we'll do a couple crazy ones maybe as we get a little bit closer to the draft where we allow ourselves to trade, but today we're going to decline any trades. We're just going to go through and decide what's there. So I'll kind of call out the picks as they go. We've got Quinnen Williams, Nick Bosa, Josh Allen, Devin White. That's a helpful one. DeAndre Baker would be a helpful one. Dwayne Haskins. We lost Ed Oliver, a second cornerback, and Byron Murphy. So now our board is a little bit different. He is a huge fan of Josh Jacobs. So I'm going to go ahead and discourage you from taking Josh Jacobs, but plenty of the guys that we love, Jonah Williams, TJ Hawkinson, Montez Sweat, and Jawan Taylor. You've got 4 great options sitting there that you're able to go with one of the a defensive player like Montez Sweat, or 3 offensive players with Jonah Williams, Jawan Taylor, TJ Hawkinson. GM Brandon Bean, you are on the clock. What is your choice?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Montez Sweat only because I really like Hawkinson, and I know fans love that pick. I just don't know that 9 is a place for me to take a tight end. I know he's great, but I think 9 is a very comfortable place for me to take a position that I haven't even touched in free agency, and that is going to really come to in the next year or so when I don't have any guys at defensive end. So I want to make sure that I shore that up and take Sweat because he's a freak.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely great, and is honestly where I would choose if I had my choice, including having Ed Oliver on the board with the guys you chose. Montez Sweat is currently my top choice. I might have Montez Sweat 3rd in the whole draft after Quinnen Williams and Nick Bosa. I think he's right there with Josh Allen, and at minimum a tied or a very close 4th. I think he is a very special player. From a measurable standpoint, he had great production in the best conference in college football and, really put us in a crazy position. There's a player falling right here that would we had TJ Hawkinson still on the board and went 2 picks before us.
Crazy.
So let's see where
Fans
they went.
lose their mind.
Yeah, this is a good example of what we would experience, though, because we did have some interesting players go early on. So we lost a handful of guys that we would be interested in. Irv Smith went to the Patriots at pick 32, which I hate. DK Metcalf went very late. TJ Hawkinson went very late. So just checking, I didn't see Noah Fant, but I don't see him still out there. So it looks like this is one of those tough spots that I know a lot of fans don't like, where we missed out on that first run of tight end. So we did not get a top tier tight end. What position would you like to look at? We've got some receivers: AJ Brown, N'Keal Harry, Hakeem Butler. We've got some of the good cornerbacks that I know a lot of guys like, Rock Ya-Sin, and Joanne Williams being 2 of those guys, although now we have 5 on the roster.
Right.
From an offensive line standpoint, possibly.
Yeah, so
Chris Lindstrom.
Lindstrom's still on the board.
Lindstrom is there. Yadni Kajust and Titus Howard, 2 possible tackles. Elton Jenkins is there. Eric McCoy, a handful of guys like that. The highest rated offensive lineman would be Elton Jenkins, it looks like, and then one of the tackles.
Yeah, I think this is one of those instances for me where obviously Rock Ya-Sin's right there, and that's somebody that we like. He feels like a process guy, wrestler, but I feel like this is one of those things we were talking about before where we have a board, he's there, but it's best player available, but also need comes into factor. We have pretty good depth at this position. We missed out on tight end. So right now I'm kind of leaning towards, I like Lindstrom a lot. I see you're clicked on Lindstrom there. I do like him a lot, but part of me is leaning towards either Hakeem Butler or N'Keal Harry, because we address wide receiver in free agency. We got a bigger target at tight end, but we still don't have that big catch radius guy in this locker room. So I'm leaning towards Harry or Butler, and I'm almost at a coin flip with whatever.
I'm a big proponent of Hakeem Butler. We did take him last draft. In a honest moment, I would take Butler, but I think that it's good to look at kind of a variety of how things might turn out, and I would support taking N'Keal Harry.
Yeah, you know what I like about Harry, and we talked about this a little bit in the Slack channel, is I feel like here's my thing with Butler and Harry. I think Harry's more polished today, and I think that he's a better productive receiver year one, and that it's kind of the same thing with Rosen and Allen, that maybe Harry's floor is higher, but that Butler's ceiling is I think the highest of this draft class. So it's depending on, do we want kind of something more reliable now that we know what we're going to get, or are we shooting for the stars and we want maybe the best wide receiver in this draft? But let's go with Harry just for the sake of the
I like that. And another way to look at that is also the depth they talked about. There's 5 or 6 corners here that are still pretty solid. I know a lot of people like Amani Oruwariye, Rock Ya-Sin, Trayvon Mullen, Joanne Williams, Justin Lane, Julian Love, Lonnie Johnson. That's 5 or 6 guys that there's a chance one of them
I love David Long.
Us there.
Yeah, David Long's a player I love.
Excellent. So, we'll start out Montez Sweat and N'Keal Harry. I think 2 great building block pieces for what we have there. So no offensive linemen yet. We can still keep an eye on tight end, but I think that I've been a big proponent that if we miss on one of those first 3 tight ends, I'm pretty comfortable waiting till that later 4th, 5th round pick, because we'll just take the best guy of that next tier of 8 to 10 guys, because they're relatively similar value.
Yeah.
So, jumping on here in the 3rd round, things are rolling. Elton Jenkins still on the board so far. Eric McCoy still there. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside still there. We are now up. So, a couple of the interior linemen. You do have
McGovern still there.
Yeah, Connor McGovern, Michael Dieter, both still there. The exact same tight ends are all still there. So, basically no one's moved. From a defensive tackle standpoint, no big names out there. Amani Oruwariye did make it to our pick here. So, I would recommend one of the interior linemen there with Jenkins or McCoy. Also have some opportunity. Again, I think we have a little bit of time to wait for the best running back, maybe in the 4th round, but there's some nice names. Damian Harris and Miles Sanders, both some good players. I think we'll get into the running backs there pretty soon. Any positions that you'd like to see?
Yeah, so right now I'm leaning towards Jenkins. The only thing is the way this particular board has fallen, it's making me consider taking running back before I want to. Really, running back for me is sweet spot is fourth and down, but seeing Sanders right there, I think it's a little high still for my liking taking him there, but gosh, if there's a run on running backs and we're looking at there's a big drop off, I think he's a little bit better than the other rest of the tier. But you know what? I think there's nothing wrong with going with Jenkins. I'm not going to lose sleep with Sanders on another team.
Yeah, and Jenkins I think has a lot of position flexibility. Is a guy that I think would fit a lot of process check boxes. So I think it's a great choice. I think that really makes sense and balances out where things are going. So now we're getting into that fourth and fifth round area. I know there's a couple guys that I like in this later round, depending on who's gone. This is where I like to look for maybe Kalen Saunders at defensive line. We did take an edge guy. This is where I like to look for Max Crosby sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where I think that basically we're going to be choosing maybe best running back, best tight end in this ballpark here. So who you like the best out of the values left at those areas.
Yeah, I know people love. I think he's off the board now at this point.
We did lose. No, we still have Love a little bit later
right
there. So Darrell Henderson, I know a lot of people like Mike Weber in Ohio State. Justice Hill tested really well. Dexter Williams had some nice film at Notre Dame. And later on, if we wanted to wait, I think there's still some value in Divino Zigbo, Miles Gaskins, and Alex Barnes. So again, running back so deep, I actually sometimes am comfortable in the fifth round.
Right.
So many names here. So there's some options there. If we do look at tight end, again, many of the same names, Isaac Nada, Caden Smith, Jay Sternberger, Caleb Wilson, even Josh Oliver. So Foster Moreau there even later. Kalen Saunders is there from a defensive line standpoint. So is Dalen Mack, who's a guy that the Bills have visited with. So a couple options there from a defensive tackle.
Yeah, Ren's an interesting, but obviously the ASU pro days today, and they're probably taking a good look.
Yep.
He's sitting right there. Go back to all here. What do we got? Trying to see who else.
David Long is the top corner that's still out there. We didn't take a corner, but again, I actually think it's not out of the question that they don't draft a corner now with having 5 on the roster. Again, I think anyone that's a good value they're going to take, but if they walk away without a corner, I don't think it's a problem now.
Sure. I think if I'm at this point and this is the board that I'm looking at, I'm pretty happy, I think, with either Henderson or Mike Weber from Ohio State. So I'd be interested in either one of those guys and really leaning on you, Coach, to say who do you think is going to be the running back of the future in that room?
I just am so intoxicated by a guy who had back-to-back years of 8.9 yards a carry where he was the only good player on their offense. And I don't think he's a perfect prospect, but when you have a chance to come in and mentor behind a Frank Gore and a LaShawn McCoy, and then next year we can look to add another mid-round running back, I think Darrell Henderson is a great opportunity to add to the roster.
Production doesn't lie. The tape doesn't lie when you watch him, for sure.
Now, the fourth round, again, we lost a couple guys here. David Long, Mike Weber went right afterwards. Bo Benchwago, I think that's an interesting name. A couple of the tight ends starting to go here, so maybe look there. We lost Caden Smith. So, again, I think so far Kalen Saunders is still there. I think that's a consideration at defensive line. Dalen Mack is still there. And now a couple of the other tight ends have gone. So Jay Sternberger, Caleb Wilson, and Josh Oliver are all still there.
You're going to have to hold me back because my draft crush is sitting right there, the 140 right next to Bryce Love, Terry McLaurin.
Oh, yeah.
And I know we've gone wide receiver already, but you'd have to really strap me down and keep me from running his card up. And my bias is going to take over here. So I'm going to really need you to come through because I'm going to have a hard time not taking him. He's sitting right there in the fourth round. I think he's a third round guy, the way it's trending for him right now. And I think he's going to be one of the better receivers in this draft class. I just thought if you take Harry, there's not really a lot of room for another guy.
I'm going to say I think that if he's still there at our next pick, it's too much value to look past. But I think with the number of tight ends that went, I think we could risk losing out there. That I think we'd be better off taking the best of the available tight ends that are at the top of the board.
But see, and it's hard though, because I don't know that those two tight ends don't do anything for me personally. If you could put them together and make one tight end, I'd really be happy with that. But Sternberger didn't test well athletically.
Yeah,
and,
it was concerning.
Obviously, there's some good tape on Nuada, but also not testing well. I mean, who would be your favorite in that realm if it were taking a tight end, and why?
Now, out of the guys that were left here, I think that there's an argument that Isaac Nada didn't have the opportunity because of how much talent was there in Georgia.
Sure.
Out of the testing, Caleb Wilson tested off the charts from a speed and explosion and quickness standpoint. Although I think he's basically a big slot receiver, I don't know that he can block barely at all. So now having Tyler Croft and Jake Fisher, maybe he's an upgrade over Jason Kroom from that standpoint. But yeah, there's some incomplete prospects there. He has Foster Moreau pretty low, although, so that's someone that if we don't really see a lot of difference, Dax Raymond's the same idea, Alize Mack, Josh Oliver. So if you think those guys are on par with these top couple guys, maybe we can go that same direction. And, I do think that it's tough to draft a guy in the fourth round that maybe doesn't have a clear path to make the roster, but because of Terry McLaurin's special teams ability, maybe that's feasible. From a value standpoint, I would honestly say
let's look at defensive line a little bit.
Yeah, with Kalen Saunders as the top guy on the board,
or Wren right there.
Either of those two, that's probably the better value of what we have left.
Yeah, let's take Saunders because we addressed defensive end.
Yes.
And so now if I can also address the interior defensive line and know that I have two guys that I'm expecting to be contributors on this team moving forward and contract control, I'd rather have that than guys I'm not even sure are going to be able to fit on this roster, especially in the fourth round.
And we lost Nada, but McLaurin did go.
I hate you. I'm quitting. Resignation.
I've ruined everything.
Oh no, Eric has talked me off of the Terry McLaurin thing a little bit just because the fit.
I was going to say we could have looked at the redshirt year pick with Bryce Love, although he did just go. And I think I have I
still think it's too early. I don't know how Bryce Love is starting to pick up in the fourth, fifth round in conversations. I still think he's a fifth or later guy.
So a couple different names. Drew Samia is a name that a lot of people like at guard. I don't know that we have room for two interior linemen with how many we've already signed. So that's maybe, again, a little bit of a difficult path.
We have room to cut Bodine.
Sure. But just with already having Jenkins, it just could get tight there, adding a second one. But it's again, from a value standpoint, I think Drew Samia needs to be a consideration. At some point, we need to take a tight end. So some of the names are still there, but I would say one of these fifth round picks here, we need to take one of the tight ends that we like. If there's any names, I don't know any of the lower level cornerbacks. Blaise Brown is a name I recognize. Mark Fields is a name I always consider. Guys that I think are worthwhile. Not a lot there.
Elite names.
Yeah, clearly. Again, I haven't put in a ton of effort on safety because we have so many good safeties already. Linebacker is interesting.
I think linebacker is pretty interesting.
Anyone named Sean Takitaki is worth considering taking. I think clearly that's a name that we need on the Buffalo Bills. And then lower, Blake Cashman and Deshaun Davis are both some upside guys that I think, have some challenges in how they fit, but I think has some opportunity to work out as well.
Yeah, I think we can wait on Cashman. I do think that there's some fit there.
Especially special teams initially.
Sure. And I think if we're really dead set on taking a tight end and walking out of here with a guy just have on the roster, and even if he's a project, I think this is actually a good spot to take Sternberger. Even though he tested poorly, I think there's enough tape to say, go back and look at that tape and figure out why he tested poorly. And that maybe in the fifth round, he's a project anyway. And if he doesn't pan out, that's okay. We can address tight end again next year. But at least you have a guy that's a rookie, that's a new toy that maybe will become something.
Yeah, and I respect anyone who has enough of a chip on his shoulder that he searches for his name in Twitter, because I was talking about how he didn't test very well and he liked my tweet.
Yeah.
And it cracked me up. So I like that he motivates himself and is looking for people out there hating on him to give himself an extra chip on his shoulder. I respect anybody searching for it.
I saw your tweet, and I did go back a little bit, and I watched 2 or 3 cut-ups of his, and he isn't going to jump off the table with his athleticism, but I don't agree that he can't be a guy that puts pressure on the seam, because he did it his whole career, and against not the biggest schools, but against good schools, he did it.
Sure, he still played in the SEC.
Yeah, so I think that he can do a good enough job in the NFL of kind of stressing defenses there. He's not going to be a guy that just jumps out of the gym. He's not going to be that new type of tight end, but I think he can do enough. And I think he'd be at least a little bit different than what the Bills have right now.
Sure. I think he's more technically sound and a better receiver than some of the other guys who are athletes that you're hoping can become a receiver.
Yeah.
So I think he has more skill, and that has value in itself.
Yep. I agree.
So we're back up on the board here again with our second, 5th round pick. Again, so some of the linebackers that are there, I think, are worth considering. We talked about we haven't taken a second receiver. If you wanted to give a guy like a Hunter Renfrow a chance, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to think we take another running back, but that's a possibility.
I mean, I'll butcher his name there, but the kid from Nebraska.
Divine Ozigbo is now. That's an interesting comment there, because we took a guy like Darrell Henderson who's way closer to Shady, which means we don't really have a Chris Ivory. I guess, the short yardage might be Frank Gore. Divine Ozigbo is a big, powerful man, so that's a possibility as well. At some point, Drew Samia's value on the board is probably more than what we can pass up, even if it does mean a challenging cut on the offensive line.
God, he's got Greg Dortch really high on this board. I keep seeing that name. I don't like that. I mean, right now, if I'm looking at this board the way it is, I don't think I have too much trouble doubling down on the guard position and hoping that Samia pans out. And if he does, I have no problem moving on from one of the guys that we already have on this roster.
I agree. And I think that it's something there where with the 5 guys we signed, plus Deion Dawkins plus Wyatt Teller, that gets us to 6 and 7. Then you're getting into the drafted guys would be 8 and 9, which would mean we cut everyone else, which is possible.
And I'm not sure Wyatt Teller is good.
Yeah. Correct. I don't know that Wyatt Teller is a roster lock. I think that he's close because of his cheap rookie value, but he might just be a depth pickup or even an inactive guy on game day.
Yep, absolutely.
A couple things to look at as we get later here. With the number of picks that we have, I actually think it's within the realm of possibility that we could look at a kicker and or a punter. I think that Stephen Hauschka is 100% our kicker as long as he's healthy. He did not finish last year healthy, and he's not young. So I don't know that it's an absolute lock. So there are Austin Seibert is the one I normally look at. There are kickers that are available. I'm not a huge fan of drafting a punter, but I know that one of our podcast brethren, Joe Marino, is a huge fan of Mitch Wisnowski. He
could get him undrafted. I guarantee it.
I believe more of that as well. And the fact that we have both Corey Carter and Corey Bojorquez, I believe that Heath Farwell is going to be able to get some value from them and kind of coach them up. But I think those are some things to consider as we get later here.
If they keep all 10 picks, I guess I could see a world where that happens. I think they'll be available in undrafted free agency if there's really a competition for it. And I feel like obviously Hauschka didn't finish healthy, but there's always kickers floating around the league that you can. I don't know about drafting. You're going to have to really get me drunk and convince me about that.
But I think getting into this 6th, 7th area is pretty much all special teams. So this is where I start looking at linebackers, corners, and safeties who can contribute on special teams. So I know some of the names you looked at, Deshaun Davis and Blake Cashman. Joe Giles-Harris is actually another good athlete out of Duke. Back at the corners, we talked about Blaise Brown and Mark Fields, I think are both potential opportunities. And then again, at safety, I don't know that there's a ton of value. I'd probably have to trust the draft board and go with someone that was high.
Now go back to all for me, because there's a guy that obviously Ren's still on the board, but Jalen Hurd is a guy that
Yeah,
also is interesting to me. If we haven't taken another wide receiver, he could be a nice project wide receiver down the road. We are not sure what we've got at wide receiver. There's a lot of bodies, but I don't know that we're sure Robert Foster is going to be the same guy he was a year ago. So there's a chance that you can talk me into that.
Sure. The same idea you talked about as Zigbo. Alex Barnes is very much that big,
Right
powerful
there.
running back guy that if we were going to go with two running backs, which I don't think we will, but if we did, I think that it would be a thunder and lightning kind of combination like that.
Sure. And Ren is right there too. I know that we've already addressed the interior line. So this is, if we keep 10 picks, it's going to be hard not to double down on positions.
Sure. And I think that we'll see that and just let the competition prove out.
Yeah. So none of these guys stand out as huge special teams contributors to me, but I don't know that we take special teams over potential talent that is sitting on the board still.
I agree. And from that standpoint, you've referenced his name multiple times, and I think he's maybe a little low on Miller's board here. I think Renell Wren would be a great pick here just to continue to add depth in that area. And, maybe it lets us make another move with a guy. Maybe it frees us up to do something else there. I would welcome Renell Wren.
Okay, let's do it. I think these mock drafts without trades are hard because it's something we've talked about. Unless they're taking a Simmons in the second round or a waiver on a Bryce Love and redshirting a guy, it's going to be really hard for Brandon Beane to walk out of here with 10 prospects. It's not realistic.
I very much think that we would see either trades of, hey, we'll give you our, fifth round this year for your fourth round next year, our sixth round this year for your fifth round next year. I think that we'll see some packages. Hey, we want to move up from the early fourth to the late third. We'll give you a fifth and a seventh. I think that we're going to see some of that kind of packaging to move up.
Yeah, I would love to get back up into the third. So if they got to move some picks, that's my sweet spot. Let's get back up there because there's a ton of talent in this particular draft too.
So we've got 2 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, a receiver, and a tight end. We have 1 running back. We don't have anyone in the back 7 on defense. So I would say these 2 picks need to be some combination of linebacker, corner, safety to get some back 7 additions on the defense, and that can probably be early special teams contributors.
Fine.
So I would say one of
the guy that I like, and I say if we're gonna go like linebacker, the cornerbacks right now are doing nothing for me.
I like Mark Fields. I actually think he's low on their board. I think he's a guy who can be smart and be a nickel player in the future, but also this late is a possibility we could sneak him onto a practice squad as well.
Sure. I don't hate the idea of the kid from Minnesota here, Blake Cashman. Okay. Only at this point, but between cornerback and linebacker, just because there is still a need at linebacker. If we can find a guy, I don't know that you're going to find a guy
7th round pick isn't terribly highly likely, but he's a name that I actually think he's a little low on there, and that
on this board,
is a probably not realistic this late, but is someone there. And then I'm just going to take Mark Fields because I like his name.
Fine, that's fine. You got it.
So, overall, we'll let it kind of come together here as we wrap up for the show. And I think that it's a good exercise to go through here. We had no repeat picks from last draft, although we had a lot of overlap in the positions that we took. We didn't take any offensive tackle this time. We took 2 interior. We waited to take an edge rusher till late last time and took one right off the bat this time. So again, it just kind of shows the flexibility of how you can still come across a very good draft without needing to take the exact same guys over and over again. So to recap for everyone, we opened up round 1 with Montez Sweat, defensive end out of Mississippi State. Round 2, N'Keal Harry from Arizona State, wide receiver. Round 3, again for Mississippi State, a center guard, Elton Jenkins. Round 4, we took running back Darrell Henderson from Memphis. Round 5, defensive tackle Kalen Saunders from Western Illinois. The second round 4. Round 5, we took Jay Sternberger, tight end from Texas A&M. Second round 5 pick, Drew Samia from Oklahoma. Round 6, we couldn't turn down the value of another defensive lineman, Rennell Wren from Arizona State. Round 7, linebacker Blake Cashman from Minnesota, and the second round 7 pick, Mark Fields, the cornerback from Clemson. So how do you feel about how we walked away here tonight, Aaron?
I think we killed it. No, it's a good draft. I think it does go to show what Brandon Beane has done prior to the draft, that we could go through 5, 6, 7 of these things and really go about it any way we want when it comes to drafting for the needs on this team and where we see needs on this team, because he's put them in such a good position where they don't have to stretch on so many of the positions to draft for needs. So it gives them so much flexibility. Again, I know we'll probably get picked apart. We don't come up with these boards. The boards kind of just are what they are on these mock drafts. So, I had last time we did it, guys were like, there's no way so-and-so is going to be there in the 4th round. And it's like, we didn't rig it him because he's sitting there. I can't help it.
Yeah, we didn't rig it to be that way. We just follow the board and how it goes.
Board. And we're not going to keep the 10 picks, obviously. I think at some point here we'll do one with some realistic, try to at least create some realistic trades that show maybe something more along the lines of what the Bills are going to try to do in a trade back scenario, probably. Yeah. And then maybe that'll give us a little more realistic. So we're not going to walk away with these 10 prospects, but if we were, I'd like them. I like all 10 of them.
No, so. I think honestly, we hit a lot of different values that were there. I like the positions that we were able to touch on. And I think it gave us a lot of nice options. And we debated if we went Hakeem Butler instead of Harry at 40, if we went Eric McCoy or, another interior lineman there. It does show you some of the positions, though. Offensive tackle drops off really fast. Cornerback has a little bit of a ledge there, but once you get past those top 6 or 7 guys, it drops off really fast. So those are some of the things that Brandon Beane's going to take into account, that if he has a chance to get a value in some of those positions, he will. But if you miss, and it drops off really quick.
And that's where I think, every time I do a mock draft, the one place that it doesn't seem to drop off is running back.
Yes.
And obviously we took
even some receiver.
Some receivers. Yeah. I mean, there's a few there that I would have wanted to take. I think Harry is a better receiver than the one.
If you want size, I think if you want size, you have to go early. If you're comfortable with just speed, you'll see Andy Isabella and Penny Hart and the guys like that falling late, Mecole Hardman, and guys that can be contributors in the NFL available really late.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that's going to be something they have to consider when they're taking these guys. And that's the one thing that I think is fun about mock drafts is once you make that pick, the assumptions that you have after that'll be there when you get to your next pick, and they aren't. It's like, oh, that cliff came really fast, and now I'm kind of stuck looking at a bunch of running backs, even though I just picked one, and I don't want to take another one. So you really got to juggle that where your board falls and where the board's going to fall past you.
Yeah, and it's something that the best thing that we have going for us is how organized and detail-oriented Brandon Beane is, and that he's going to have us prepared.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, so I'm happy, and I think that this is a great exercise to continue throughout the next month here.
Yeah, we'll certainly do more of these. I think it's good to walk through the different prospects and what we have out there, and I think that the fans enjoy it, to be able to see our thought process and to tell us why we're idiots and why we should have taken someone else.
Absolutely. Although I have a wife, I don't need anybody else to tell me I'm an idiot. I have a wife and a Twitter account. That's all I need in my life.
Yeah, no, that does fulfill that.
Speaking of Twitter, where can the good people here that have joined us this evening, find you, and what are you up to?
The good people can find me at Greg Thompsett, GregTompsett. The bad people can find me at Aaron Quinn 716.
Yeah,
come out, give us a follow. We have a good time on Twitter. Try to answer back questions. Try to interact with people. Go back and forth. So just really enjoy being able to kind of talk Bills and be able to have fun with everybody on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you can find me at Aaron Quinn 716. I love getting into it with anybody who will engage with me on the internet. So definitely follow me there. Make sure you head over to cover1.net. If this is your first time joining us, that is who we are with. We are with Cover One. We cover the Bills, but there's so much more to Cover One than what we do here. We have scouting reports. We have a whole team that just covers the draft. If you're watching the YouTube, I'm scrolling through right now. All these articles are popping up all the time. Different. This one right here is a Bills archetype, Jerry Tillery. We have a scouting report on Titus Howard. So these these guys are working super hard around the clock. This is their primo time of year, busting out draft scouting reports, all types of things. So make sure you head over to cover1.net. Head over to here. You can go to the premium section of the website, the premium content. Make sure that you join the premium subscription. Right now, it's $10 for the premium subscription, and it's for the entire year. It's a deal that you really can't beat. Draft guides are more expensive than this, so make sure that you head over and do that. You can find us on iOS or Android with our mobile app, so head over to whatever market your phone uses and make sure that you download our mobile app. It sends notifications whenever new articles come up, so when you're at work and you're bored and an article pops up, it's a great time to go to the bathroom and read an article instead of working. I know that's what Greg primarily is doing during the day. Never. And if you're here right now joining us on YouTube, we really appreciate it because it's a fun way to interact with you guys. But make sure that you head over and subscribe to the page. The shows aren't the only thing we do through YouTube. Eric does a ton of video content on YouTube, a lot of our breakdowns, and you'll get notified anytime those come up or anytime we do go live. So make sure that you hit the little subscribe and then the little bell that tells you to be notified when we go live. You won't miss out on that. If you're listening to us through the podcast, we really appreciate that as well on the audio side. If you get a chance, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. That really helps it go a long way to continuing to bring you guys the content, because it takes quite a bit of people and a lot of work to get this content out to you all the time, whether it's the podcast or the articles, and all that little bit helps because we're really run by the fans. We can't do it without you guys. So we appreciate you coming out week in and week out and bearing with us through this time leading up to the draft, because I know it's been a long time before anything big has happened. So join us next week. We'll be back at it Wednesdays, 7 p.m. If you hit that little notification bell, you'll get notified. So make sure you do that, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks again.